maid's daughter is denied her first-class seat, but 5 minutes later, the flight is grounded, phones are recording, and the pilot's career ends midair. "I'm sorry, miss, but you don't belong here." Those were the words that started it all. A little girl in a worn pink coat, clutching a one-eyed teddy bear, sitting quietly in seat 1A, first class. Around her, the air smelled of leather, money, and quiet judgment. One flight attendant's decision, one captain's pride, one misunderstanding that would bring an entire airline to its knees. No one on Flight 714 knew that the smallest passenger on board carried a name that would echo all the way to Washington. What started as a routine flight from Dallas to D.C. ended as a national reckoning. This is the story of how a maid's daughter in seat 1A grounded a plane, silenced a captain, and reminded a nation what true honor looks like. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. A little girl in a worn coat should not be in first class. This was the one unshakable truth in senior flight attendant Brenda Miller's world. Yet, here the girl was, a small, blonde-haired island in the vast, plush sea of seat 1A. Her name was Emily. She was 11 years old, and she was about to bring the nation's fourth-largest airline to its knees. The cabin of American Legacy Air Flight 714 was a quiet hum of expensive cologne and quiet importance. Businessmen in tailored suits reviewed spreadsheets on glowing laptops. A woman with perfectly manicured nails and a silk scarf draped just so flipped through a glossy magazine, her diamond bracelet catching the morning light. The air itself seemed filtered, scrubbed clean of the ordinary world. It smelled of leather, privilege, and the faint, sterile scent of recycled oxygen. Then there was Emily. She sat perched on the edge of the enormous seat, her small sneakers not quite reaching the floor. She wore simple blue jeans, faded at the knees, and a pink coat that, while clean, had seen better winters. In her lap, she clutched a brown teddy bear with one-button eye and fur loved thin in patches. His name was Major Ted. He had been a gift from her grandfather, and he was her silent, steadfast co-pilot on this journey. Brenda Miller watched from the galley, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. She had been flying for 19 years. She had served movie stars, politicians, and titans of industry. She had a sixth sense for things that were out of place. And this child, this small, quiet girl in the airline's most prestigious seat, was as out of place as a sparrow in a flock of eagles. It had to be a mistake. A child from economy who had wandered up, dazzled by the wide seats and extra legroom. It happened sometimes. They were curious. You just had to be firm, but gentle, and guide them back to their proper place. She smoothed the front of her starched uniform, a practiced gesture of authority, and approached the girl. Her smile was bright, professional, and entirely fake. "Well, hello there, sweetie," Brenda began, her voice a sweet, condescending melody. "Are you a little lost? Your mommy and daddy must be looking for you." Emily looked up. Her eyes were a clear, serious blue. She did not seem intimidated by the uniform or the smile. "No, ma'am," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I'm in the right place." Brenda's smile tightened a fraction. "Oh, I'm sure you think so. This is a very nice seat, isn't it? But this is first class. Your seat is probably in the back. Can I see your boarding pass, honey? I'll help you find your way." Emily held up the ticket she had been clutching in her other hand. It was a stiff, cardstock ticket, not a flimsy piece of paper from a home printer. The lettering was crisp. "Vance, Emily. Seat 1A." Brenda took it, expecting to find an error. She examined it under the cabin light. Flight 714 to Washington, D.C. Correct date. Correct seat number. There was no mistake on the ticket. So, the mistake had to be how the ticket was acquired. Her mind raced through the possibilities. A misprint at the kiosk? A gate agent's colossal blunder? Or something else? Something less innocent. "This is a very expensive ticket, sweetie," Brenda said, handing it back. The condescending pet name was a habit, a tool she used to establish control. "Sometimes there are mix-ups in the computer. I'm sure your real seat is very comfortable, too. Why don't you come with me and we'll get this all sorted out?" She reached for Emily's hand. Emily didn't pull away, but she didn't move, either. She just held Major Ted a little tighter. "My grandpa told me to wait here," she said, her voice unwavering. He said a man in a uniform would come get me when it was time. He said not to move from this seat. Grandpa. The word conjured an image in Brenda's mind. A doting old man who had probably used all his retirement savings to buy his granddaughter a ticket he couldn't afford. He probably didn't understand the rules. He didn't understand that a child couldn't fly alone in first class without a guardian, without the proper paperwork. It was a security risk, a liability. That's very sweet, Brenda said, her patience beginning to fray. But your grandpa isn't here, and the rules are very clear. Now, are you going to come with me, or do I need to get the captain? The threat hung in the air. For most passengers, the phrase, get the captain, was the final word. It meant you had crossed a line. It meant you were now a problem. Emily looked down at her bear, then back up at Brenda. Her blue eyes held no fear, only a quiet resolve that was unnerving in a child so young. The man is supposed to be a soldier, not a pilot. Brenda stared, bewildered. A soldier? What on earth was this child talking about? That's enough, she snapped, her professional mask finally slipping. You are holding up the boarding process. We have a schedule to keep. Now come with me. Right now. From across the aisle, in seat 1B, a man lowered his newspaper. He was in his late 50s, with kind eyes and a well-tailored but unassuming gray suit. His name was Robert Peterson, and he was a mid-level executive at a software company. He had seen the entire exchange. Excuse me, Mr. Peterson said, his voice calm and reasonable. Is there a problem, miss? The little girl has a ticket for that seat. Brenda turned to him, her face a mask of irritation. Sir, this is a crew matter. Please stay out of it. She's not bothering anyone, Mr. Peterson persisted gently. She's just sitting there quietly. Her ticket seems to be in order. Perhaps you could just let her be? Sir, Brenda said, her voice dropping to a low, menacing hiss. This is a matter of airline security and federal regulations. I need you to return to your newspaper. The businessman in 2C, who had been listening with open impatience, chimed in. For goodness sake, just get the kid out of here so we can take off. I have a meeting in D.C. Some of us have important things to do. A murmur of agreement rippled through the first-class cabin. The passengers wanted what they had paid for, a smooth, quiet, and efficient flight. A small girl in a worn coat was a disruption, an anomaly, an inconvenience. Brenda felt the support of the other passengers as a wave of validation. She was right. She was in control. She turned back to Emily, her face set like stone. Last chance, young lady. I'm calling the captain. Emily just hugged Major Ted. Grandpa said to be brave. Furious, Brenda turned on her heel and marched toward the cockpit. This had gone on long enough. Captain Evans would know what to do. He always did. He was a man who appreciated order. He would take one look at the situation and put this child back in her place. The cabin door hissed shut behind her, leaving Emily alone in the silence. Mr. Peterson gave her a small, encouraging smile. Emily offered a tiny, hesitant one in return. She wasn't scared. Not really. Her grandfather had taught her about waiting. He had taught her about following orders. And her orders were clear. Stay in seat 1A. Wait for the soldier. She smoothed the fur on Major Ted's head. The bear had been with her grandfather through 3 tours in dusty, faraway places. He had been a silent witness to things she couldn't imagine. He was a very, very brave bear. And right now, holding him, Emily felt a little of that bravery seep into her. She would wait, just like he said. She had no idea that her simple act of obedience was about to ignite a firestorm that would be seen and felt all the way to the highest office in the land. Captain David Evans considered himself the king of his domain. The cockpit was his castle, and the airplane was his kingdom. He was a pilot with 26 years of experience, a man with a commanding presence and an ego to match. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his uniform was immaculate, and his voice carried the easy, unquestionable weight of absolute authority. When he walked through an airport, people noticed. He liked that. He was in the middle of his pre-flight checklist when the cockpit door swung open. Brenda stood there, her face flushed with anger. Captain, she said, her voice tight. We have a situation in first class. Captain Evans didn't look up from his checklist. What kind of situation? He asked, his tone already laced with impatience. He hated situations. They were messy. They caused delays. It's a passenger. A child. She's in seat 1A and refusing to move, Brenda explained quickly. She has a ticket for the seat, but it's obviously a mistake. She's alone. No guardian on file. She keeps talking about her grandpa and waiting for a soldier. She's holding up boarding, and the other first-class passengers are getting restless. Evans finally looked up, his brow furrowed. A child alone in 1A? That was not just irregular. It was impossible. The system had safeguards to prevent that. Unless, did her parents dump her there and go back to economy? He asked. It was a common, cheap trick. Buy one first-class ticket for the kid, and then try to take turns sitting in the seat. I don't think so, Brenda said. She insists she's supposed to be there. I told her I was getting you. She didn't even flinch. That piqued the captain's interest. Most problem passengers caved at the mention of his name. This was different. Still, a problem was a problem. And the solution to all problems on his aircraft was the same: decisive action. All right, he said, unclipping his harness. I'll handle it. He strode out of the cockpit like a storm cloud moving in. The moment he entered the first-class cabin, the atmosphere changed. The low chatter stopped. All eyes turned to him. His 4 gold stripes gleamed on his epaulets. This was his kingdom, and he was here to restore order. He saw the girl immediately. She was exactly as Brenda had described her: small, blonde, out of place. She looked like a lost doll in the enormous leather chair. His first thought was one of pure annoyance. This was a ridiculous waste of his time. He stopped in the aisle next to her seat. He loomed over her, a formidable figure of authority. He didn't smile. He didn't soften his voice. I'm Captain Evans, he said, his voice calm but hard. My flight attendant tells me you're in the wrong seat. Emily looked up at him. She took in the uniform, the stern face, the shiny gold stripes. He was a man in a uniform, but he wasn't the right one. No, sir, she said politely. This is my seat. My ticket says 1A. I've seen the ticket, Captain Evans said dismissively. There's been a mistake with the computer. Now, this has gone on long enough. You need to go back to your parents. My mother is at work, Emily said simply. She's a maid. She couldn't come with me. The captain's expression hardened. A maid's daughter. It all clicked into place for him. The cheap coat. The defiance. The girl didn't know how to behave in a place like this because she had never been in one. She was fighting to keep the seat because she knew she didn't belong in it. I don't have time for games, young lady, he said, his voice turning colder. Where are your parents? I told you my mom is working. I'm traveling by myself to see my grandpa. He's sick. Mr. Peterson, in seat 1B, cleared his throat. Captain, he said, trying to intervene again. With all due respect, the girl has a valid ticket. She's a paying passenger, same as the rest of us. What is the actual problem with her sitting here? Captain Evans shot him a withering glare. The actual problem, sir, is that this child is an unaccompanied minor in a premium cabin without the proper authorization, which is a violation of company policy. The actual problem is that she is delaying the departure of a multi-million-dollar aircraft and inconveniencing 138 other passengers. The actual problem is that I am the captain of this aircraft and my crew's instructions will be followed. Is that clear enough for you? Mr. Peterson recoiled as if struck. He leaned back in his seat, silenced. The captain had made his point. There would be no more debate. He turned his attention back to Emily. His face was inches from hers. Now, for the last time, are you going to walk back to the main cabin, or am I going to have you removed from my airplane? Emily's lower lip trembled, just for a second. He was trying to scare her. She knew it. But her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. There will be people, Emmy, who judge you by where you come from. They'll see your mother's hard work on your hands and think it means you are less than them. You are not less than them. You are a Vance. And a Vance is never, ever afraid to stand their ground when they are in the right. She lifted her small chin. I'm waiting for the soldier, she whispered. It was all she had left. The captain's face turned red. He had given her a chance. He had been firm. He had been reasonable in his own mind. And she was still defying him. This small, stubborn child was making a fool of him in front of his crew and his first-class passengers. Brenda, he barked, not taking his eyes off Emily. Call the gate. Tell them we have a non-compliant passenger. Have airport security meet us at the jet bridge. We're removing her. A gasp went through the cabin. Airport security? For a little girl? It seemed extreme, even to the impatient businessman in 2C. Several passengers began quietly recording the scene with their phones. This was no longer just an inconvenience. It was a spectacle. Brenda hurried to the service phone, her face a mixture of triumph and unease. She had won. The captain had backed her play, but a knot of discomfort was twisting in her stomach. It felt wrong. Deep down, she knew it was wrong. But she had come too far to back down now. She made the call. Captain Evans stood straight, crossing his arms over his chest. He was the picture of authority. "The decision has been made," he announced to the cabin, as if to quell any potential dissent. "We will depart as soon as this situation is resolved." Emily felt a tear slide down her cheek. She wasn't crying from fear, but from a deep, aching disappointment. Her grandpa had told her that uniforms meant something. They meant honor. They meant protection. This man's uniform seemed to mean nothing but anger. She hugged Major Ted to her chest and stared out the small, oval window. She didn't know what to do now. She had followed her orders, but it wasn't working. Maybe Grandpa was wrong. Maybe she wasn't brave enough. The jet bridge remained attached to the plane, a silent tube connecting the cabin to the terminal. The final boarding call had come and gone. The scheduled departure time of 9:15 a.m. ticked past. It was now 9:22 a.m. The engines were silent. Flight 714 was officially delayed. Inside, the tension was thick enough to taste. Captain Evans stood firm in the aisle, a statue of impatience. Brenda hovered near the front, avoiding eye contact with the passengers. Mr. Peterson stared blankly at his newspaper, unable to read, his mind replaying the captain's harsh words. The other passengers murmured amongst themselves, their annoyance curdling into a strange mix of discomfort and morbid curiosity. Every few seconds, another phone would be raised, its small black lens pointed toward seat 1A. Emily had stopped crying. She was now in a state of quiet resolve. She had done all she could do. She whispered into Major Ted's ear, telling him about the mean pilot and the angry flight attendant. The bear, as always, was a very good listener. A new figure appeared at the open cabin door. It was the gate agent, a harried-looking woman named Sarah, her face pale and stressed. She held a phone to her ear, a look of utter bewilderment on her face. She wasn't followed by airport security. She was alone. "Captain Evans?" Sarah called out, her voice trembling slightly. "What is it, Sarah?" the captain snapped. "Where's security? I told you to get them here 5 minutes ago." "Sir, I have a call for you," Sarah stammered. "It's from the airline's operations center. They said it's a code black priority. I've never even heard of that. They insisted on speaking with you directly." Immediately, Captain Evans frowned. Code black. That wasn't in any of the company manuals he knew. It sounded serious. It also sounded like an excuse. "Security, Sarah. That was the instruction, not a phone call." "Sir, please," Sarah begged, her eyes wide with panic. "The man on the phone. He said if you didn't take this call right now, you wouldn't have a plane to fly. He said to tell you it's a Pentagon matter." The word Pentagon landed in the cabin like a physical blow. The whispering stopped. The phones were lowered. The Pentagon? What could the Department of Defense possibly want with a commercial flight to D.C.? Captain Evans felt the first prickle of unease. This was a strange and unwelcome complication. He was a commercial pilot. He dealt with weather patterns and passenger manifests, not military matters. "Fine," he said, striding toward the gate agent. He snatched the phone from her hand. "This is Captain Evans." "Who is this?" His arrogant, commanding tone was met with a voice that was the exact opposite. It was quiet. It was cold. It was absolutely devoid of emotion. It was the sound of pure, undiluted power. "Captain Evans," the voice on the other end said, and the connection was so clear it felt like the man was standing next to him. "This is General Mark O'Malley, United States Air Force, North American Aerospace Defense Command. Am I to understand that you are currently holding American Legacy Air Flight 714 on the ground at Gate C-34? The captain's blood ran cold. NORAD, a four-star general? He had been expecting a desk jockey from the operations center, not one of the most powerful military men in the country. Yes, General. Evans stammered, his posture deflating slightly. We've had a minor security issue with a passenger. We're in the process of resolving it. Describe the passenger, Captain, the general's voice commanded. It's an unaccompanied minor. A young girl. She's in a first-class seat without the proper authorization and is refusing to cooperate with the crew. There was a moment of silence on the line. It stretched for 3 seconds, then 4, then 5. It was the loudest silence Captain Evans had ever heard. Captain, the general said, and the temperature in his voice dropped another 20 degrees. Are you describing a little girl with blonde hair, approximately 11 years of age, holding a one-eyed teddy bear? Captain Evans felt his throat tighten. His eyes darted toward Emily, who was watching him with her wide, serious eyes. Yes, General. That's her. How did you know that? Because, Captain, the General said, his voice now a blade of ice. That little girl is Emily Vance. Her grandfather is General Michael Vance. You may have heard of him. He is a recipient of the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, and 3 Purple Hearts. He is a living legend and a national hero who is currently in the final stages of a terminal illness at Walter Reed Medical Center. The name Michael Vance hit the cabin like a shockwave. Even those who didn't follow military affairs knew that name. The ghost of Kandahar. The man who had held off an enemy battalion single-handedly for 3 days. He was a titan, a figure of American myth. The President of the United States, General O'Malley continued, his voice dangerously soft, signed a special commendation this morning to ensure that General Vance's granddaughter could be brought to his bedside with the utmost speed, comfort, and care. That ticket she holds was not purchased. It was requisitioned, Captain, by us, the Department of Defense. Captain Evans felt the phone shaking in his hand. His entire body had gone numb. He looked at Emily, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw not a maid's daughter in a cheap coat, but the granddaughter of a hero. He saw a little girl on the most important journey of her life, and he had tried to have her thrown off the plane. Her authorization, the general's voice cut through his panic, is a Level 5 national security priority transport order. It supersedes any and all airline policies. The order states that she is not to be moved, questioned, or disturbed for any reason. A military escort, a decorated colonel, is waiting for her at the arrival gate in D.C. He is the soldier she was told to wait for. Brenda, who had crept close enough to hear, put a hand to her mouth. Her face had turned a ghastly shade of white. The soldier. It was real. Captain Evans, the general said, and now there was no coldness left, only a quiet, simmering rage. You have not had a minor security issue. You have interfered with a priority military operation. You have willfully harassed the family of a national hero. And you have done so in a manner that, according to the multiple video streams I am now watching, is a disgrace to your uniform and your company. Video streams. The captain's eyes shot around the cabin. He saw them, then. The phones. All still pointed at him, recording his downfall. General, I didn't know, he whispered. It was a pathetic defense, and he knew it. You didn't know because you didn't ask, Captain, the general retorted. You saw a child who you decided did not belong, and you made an assumption. Your assumption has caused distress to a grieving child and has delayed a matter of national importance. Now, I am going to give you one final order. Are you listening closely? Yes, sir, Evans breathed. You will return to your cockpit. You will not speak another word to that child or to any passenger on this plane. You will await further instructions. If you deviate from this order in any way, I will personally see to it that you are not only fired, but that you are placed on the federal no-fly list so permanently that you will not be able to board a crop duster in a cornfield. Am I understood? Understood, General, the captain said, his voice a broken rasp. The line went dead. Captain Evans stood frozen for a long moment, the silent phone pressed to his ear. The silence in the cabin was absolute. 138 pairs of eyes were fixed on him, their expressions a mixture of shock, pity, and contempt. He had been the king of his kingdom. Now he was just a man who had been publicly, thoroughly, and devastatingly humiliated. He lowered the phone and handed it back to the gate agent without a word. He didn't look at Brenda. He didn't look at the passengers. He turned and walked back to the cockpit, his shoulders slumped. The swagger was gone. The authority was gone. All that was left was a man who had made the biggest mistake of his life. The cockpit door closed, but this time, it felt less like a gateway to a castle and more like the heavy door of a tomb. The departure of Captain Evans had left a void that was quickly filled by a swirling mix of emotions. The passengers who had been recording the incident now looked down at their phones, not with the smug satisfaction of having captured a viral moment, but with a dawning sense of gravity. They had not just filmed an argument. They had witnessed a man's career implode in real time. They had been participants, however passive, in a story far larger and more important than a simple flight delay. Brenda Miller stood frozen by the galley, her world tilting on its axis. Every rule she had lived by, every assumption she had made, had been wrong. The child in the worn coat wasn't a problem to be managed. She was a person of immense importance, a protected ward of the state on a sacred mission. The uniform Brenda wore, which had always felt like a suit of armor, now felt like a costume for a fool. Her authority, which she had wielded with such righteous confidence, had been exposed as a hollow, petty thing. Her eyes met Mr. Peterson's from across the aisle. His gentle, kind face held no "I told you so," no trace of victory. There was only a profound sadness, a shared sense of shame for what they had all just witnessed and what they had all, in their own way, allowed to happen. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a gesture that said, "What have we become?" The impatient businessman in 2C stared out his window, his face a deep, uncomfortable red. He had called her the kid. He had demanded she be removed so his important meeting wouldn't be delayed. He now felt a hot flush of humiliation that had nothing to do with the captain and everything to do with himself. His meeting about third-quarter profit margins suddenly seemed grotesquely insignificant compared to a Medal of Honor recipient's final hours with his granddaughter. But the focus of all this silent, churning regret was Emily. She had heard the words on the phone. National hero, Medal of Honor, President of the United States. They were big, important words, but they felt distant, like something from a history book. To her, General Michael Vance was not a legend. He was just Grandpa. He was the one who taught her how to tie her shoes, who made pancakes in the shape of dinosaurs, and who told her stories about brave soldiers and even braver bears. She hadn't wanted to cause all this trouble. She had just wanted to follow his instructions. She looked at the faces staring at her. Before, their looks had been cold, annoyed, dismissive. Now, they were different. They were full of a strange, heavy awe. They looked at her as if she were a different person, but she wasn't. She was still just Emily Vance, a maid's daughter, on her way to see her grandpa. Slowly, almost timidly, Brenda approached seat 1A. She knelt down, a difficult and humbling gesture in her tight uniform skirt. She was now at eye level with the little girl she had so thoroughly misjudged. "Emily," she began, her voice barely a whisper. The condescending sweetie and honey were gone, replaced by a raw, genuine respect. "I am so sorry. I was wrong. What I did, what I said to you, there is no excuse. I was wrong." Tears welled in Brenda's eyes. They were not tears of self-pity, but of deep, gut-wrenching shame. In that moment, she wasn't a senior flight attendant. She was just a woman who had been cruel to a child, and the knowledge of it was crushing her. Emily looked at the crying woman. Her mother cried sometimes, too. Usually when she was tired, when her back ached from scrubbing floors, or when there wasn't enough money for the bills. Her mother's tears were quiet and exhausted. This woman's tears were loud and full of pain. Emily did what her mother always told her to do when someone was sad. She offered a bit of comfort. She reached out her small hand and patted Brenda's arm. "It's okay," she said softly. "Grandpa says making a mistake doesn't make you a bad person. It's what you do next that counts." The simple, profound wisdom of the child's words broke through Brenda's composure completely. She let out a small sob. The forgiveness was more painful than the condemnation would have been, because she knew she didn't deserve it. From the back of the first-class cabin, a new voice spoke, quiet but clear. "Could the little girl have a glass of water, please? And maybe a warm blanket?" The voice belonged to the woman with the diamond bracelet. Her face, which had previously held a look of bored indifference, was now etched with compassion. The request was a small gesture, but it was a signal. The ice was breaking. Brenda nodded, wiping her eyes. "Of course. Right away." She hurried to the galley, grateful for a task, a way to be useful. She returned not only with a bottle of the finest spring water and a plush first-class blanket, but also a small bowl of warm nuts and a can of apple juice. She placed them carefully on the tray table in front of Emily. "Is there anything else I can get for you, Emily?" Brenda asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Anything at all?" Emily shook her head. "No, thank you, ma'am." She wrapped the soft blanket around her shoulders and took a small sip of the apple juice. It felt good. The atmosphere in the cabin had undergone a seismic shift. The silent tension had been replaced by a quiet, shared sense of purpose. It was no longer about getting to DC on time. It was about getting Emily to DC. This flight was no longer a routine commercial trip. It had become a mission. The gate agent, Sarah, reappeared at the cabin door. She looked directly at Brenda. "The operations center just called back," she said, her voice now steady. "They're grounding the plane." A confused murmur went through the cabin. Grounding the plane? Why? The problem was resolved. "What do you mean?" Brenda asked. "They're not canceling the flight," Sarah explained, looking at her notes. "They're just changing it. They've delisted Flight 714 from the commercial schedule. It's now designated as a private government charter. The other 138 passengers are being rebooked on other flights with apologies and full compensation." The passengers looked at each other in disbelief. The entire plane was being requisitioned? For one little girl? Sarah continued. "And they're sending a new flight crew. A new pilot and co-pilot are on their way from the operations center now. They said to tell you, Brenda, that you have a choice. You can deplane, and a new first-class attendant will take your place. Or, if you wish, you may continue on this flight to DC as Emily Vance's personal attendant." She paused. "The choice is entirely yours." Everyone understood the unspoken meaning. This was a test, or perhaps a chance for redemption. Brenda looked at Emily, who was now carefully arranging the warm blanket over Major Ted. The little girl looked so small, so vulnerable, despite the immense power that now surrounded her. She was a child going to see her dying grandfather, and for a few hours, she was Brenda's responsibility. Not as a passenger, not as a seat number, but as a person. The words of the child echoed in her mind. "It's what you do next that counts." Brenda stood up straight, her resolve hardening. The shame was still there, a hot coal in her stomach, but it was now joined by something else, a fierce, protective determination. "I'm staying," Brenda said, her voice clear and strong, leaving no room for doubt. "I will be honored to see Miss Vance safely to Washington." She had made her choice. She didn't know if it would save her job. She didn't know if it would make up for the terrible mistake she had made. But she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that it was the right thing to do. It was the first step on the long road back. The process of deplaning was surreal. One by one, the passengers from economy and business class filed past the first-class cabin, their eyes drawn to the small girl in seat 1A. They had been told only that the flight was experiencing a VIP transport situation that required the plane. They whispered and pointed, their faces a mix of confusion and awe. Then came the first-class passengers. As they gathered their expensive briefcases and designer bags, they each paused as they passed Emily's seat. The impatient businessman was first. He stopped in the aisle, his face still flushed. He looked down at Emily, his eyes full of a clumsy, unpracticed remorse. "Young lady," he stammered, I want to apologize for my behavior. I was out of line. Completely out of line. I wish you and your grandfather all the best." He nodded awkwardly and hurried off the plane, not waiting for a response. The woman with the diamond bracelet paused, too. She reached into her purse and pulled out a fine, silk scarf, the one she had been wearing earlier. It was a beautiful thing, patterned with soft blue flowers. "For your bear," she said softly, handing it to Emily. "So he doesn't get cold." Emily took it and carefully wrapped it around Major Ted's neck. It looked very distinguished. Mr. Peterson was the last to leave. He knelt beside Emily's seat, his kind eyes level with hers. "You are a very brave young woman, Emily Vance," he said. "Your grandfather has every reason to be proud of you. Don't let anyone ever make you feel like you don't belong." He gently squeezed her shoulder, gave her a warm smile, and then he, too, was gone. Soon, the plane was empty. All 138 other souls had vanished, leaving only Emily, Brenda, and the silent, waiting aircraft. It was strangely peaceful. The quiet hum of the auxiliary power was the only sound. Brenda moved through the now empty cabin, collecting discarded newspapers and empty glasses. The work was familiar, comforting. It gave her hands something to do while her mind tried to process the morning's cataclysmic events. Her career, as she knew it, was over. Even if she wasn't fired, she would forever be the flight attendant who tried to kick a hero's granddaughter off a plane. The story was already spreading. She could feel it in the silent vibrations of the internet. By the time they landed in DC, she would be infamous. And yet, As she looked at Emily, who was quietly humming a song to her bear, a strange sense of calm settled over her. Maybe her old career was over. But maybe, just maybe, something new was beginning. A chance to be better. A chance to learn that respect wasn't something you demanded. It was something you earned. And true authority didn't come from a uniform or a title. It came from character. It came from kindness. It was a lesson she had learned in the most brutal way possible, from an 11-year-old girl in a worn pink coat. A half-hour later, 2 new pilots arrived. They were older men, with calm, serious faces and uniforms that seemed to carry a little more weight. The captain introduced himself as John Riley. He didn't mention Captain Evans. He didn't mention the incident. He simply came to seat 1A and smiled warmly at Emily. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice gentle and respectful. "It's an honor to be your pilot today. We're all fueled up and ready to go. We'll have you in Washington in no time." He then turned to Brenda. "Brenda," he said, his expression softening. "Good to have you with us. The tower has given us a direct, priority route. No delays. We're cleared for immediate takeoff as soon as you give us the all-clear." Brenda nodded, her throat tight. "We're ready, Captain." He gave a final, reassuring nod to Emily and returned to the cockpit. A few minutes later, the heavy cabin door thudded shut. The jet bridge retracted with a hydraulic hiss. The powerful engines began to spool up, their low rumble vibrating through the floor. Brenda went through the safety demonstration, her voice clear and practiced. But this time, she wasn't speaking to a cabin full of strangers. She was speaking to an audience of one. Her sole purpose, her only duty on this flight, was the safety and comfort of Emily Vance. As the plane taxied onto the runway, Brenda took the seat across the aisle from Emily. "Are you doing okay?" she asked softly. Emily nodded, looking out the window at the blur of runway lights. "I've never been on a plane before," she said, her voice a little smaller than before. "It's a wonderful feeling," Brenda said, her voice full of a genuine warmth Emily had not heard before. "It's like being a bird. For a little while, you get to leave everything on the ground behind." The engines roared to life. The plane surged forward, pressing them back into their seats. It was a thrilling, powerful rush. Emily gasped, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and delight. She clutched Major Ted's paw. Brenda reached across the aisle and placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "It's okay," Brenda said, her voice a calm anchor in the storm of noise and motion. "I'm right here." And then, with a final, graceful lift, they were airborne. The ground fell away. The buildings and cars shrank to the size of toys. They climbed through a thick layer of gray clouds. And then suddenly, they broke through into a world of impossible, brilliant blue. The sun was dazzling, the sky an endless, perfect dome above them. Emily stared, mesmerized. She had never seen anything so beautiful. It was a world away from the gray, noisy city. It was a world away from the angry faces and harsh words in the cabin just an hour ago. Up here, everything was clean and bright and quiet. "Wow," she whispered. Brenda smiled, a real smile this time. "Wow, indeed." They flew on in comfortable silence for a while, suspended between the earth and the sun. Brenda brought Emily a coloring book and crayons she had found in one of the storage compartments. Emily spent the next hour carefully coloring a picture of a castle, making the towers bright pink and the flag a cheerful yellow. She was a child again, lost in a simple, pleasant task. As she colored, Brenda watched her, a question forming in her mind. Finally, she gathered the courage to ask it. "Emily," she began hesitantly, "your grandfather, General Vance, what is he like?" Emily didn't look up from her coloring. "He's the bravest man in the world," she said simply. "He tells the best stories. And he gives the best hugs. His hugs feel like a big, warm blanket." Her crayon paused. "He's sick now. Mom says his body is tired. But his hugs are still the same." The simple, loving description cut through all the mythology. He wasn't the ghost of Kandahar. He wasn't a national hero. He was a grandpa who gave the best hugs. "He sounds like a wonderful man," Brenda said, her voice thick. "He is," Emily said. She looked up from her picture, her blue eyes serious. "He told me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared." She looked Brenda right in the eye. "You were scared, weren't you? When you knelt down and said you were sorry." Brenda was taken aback by the child's perception. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I was. I was terrified. But you did it anyway, Emily stated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Grandpa would say that was very brave. Brenda felt the tears welling up again. But this time, they were different. They weren't tears of shame. They were tears of a strange, painful, and beautiful kind of grace. A little girl, the very one she had wronged, was teaching her the meaning of courage. The rest of the flight passed quietly. As they began their descent into Washington, D.C., the world below slowly came into focus. The neat grids of suburban streets, the winding ribbon of the Potomac River, and then the iconic shapes of the monuments, gleaming white in the afternoon sun. Brenda pointed them out. See that tall white needle? That's the Washington Monument. And that big white house with all the columns is the Lincoln Memorial. Your grandpa used to work in a very important building not far from here, the Pentagon. Emily looked down at the city, the center of all the power and history she had only read about in books. It was her grandpa's world, and for the first time, she began to understand the weight of the name she carried. Vance. It wasn't just a name. It was a legacy. The plane touched down with a gentle bump. It didn't taxi to a crowded commercial gate. Instead, it rolled to a private, isolated part of the airfield where a single black car was waiting on the tarmac. Standing beside the car were two figures. One was a woman in a sharp business suit, her posture radiating efficiency. The other was a man in a crisp, dark green army dress uniform. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his chest a rainbow of service ribbons. On his shoulders were the silver eagles of a full colonel. He was the soldier. As the plane came to a stop and the engine spooled down, the cabin door was opened not by a jet bridge, but by a rolling staircase. The crisp, cool air of Virginia filled the cabin. Brenda unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. She turned to Emily and helped her with her coat. Well, she said softly, we're here. She walked with Emily to the open door. The colonel on the tarmac looked up. His stern, professional face broke into a warm, gentle smile the moment he saw Emily. He walked to the bottom of the stairs and waited. Brenda knelt down one last time, so she was face to face with Emily. It was an honor to fly with you, Emily Vance, she said, her voice full of a sincerity that made it feel like a vow. Emily did something that surprised them both. She leaned forward and gave Brenda a quick hug. It was small and fleeting, but it was real. Thank you for being brave, she whispered. Then, she turned. With Major Ted clutched in one hand, she walked down the stairs, her small sneakers making soft sounds on the metal steps. She walked toward the waiting soldier, not with fear, but with a quiet sense of purpose. Her journey was almost over. She was here to see her grandpa, and she was right on time. Brenda watched from the top of the stairs as Emily reached the bottom. The colonel took a half step forward, then stopped and knelt, bringing himself down to her level, just as Brenda had done. The gesture was a mirror image, yet the meaning was entirely different. Brenda had knelt in shame. The colonel knelt in reverence. Emily Vance, he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble that was nothing like the parade ground bark one might expect. My name is Colonel Thomas Hayes. It is my profound honor to finally meet you. Your grandfather speaks of you often. Emily looked at his face. It was a kind face, with fine lines around the eyes that spoke of years spent smiling into the sun. He wasn't scary at all. He was just a man in a very neat suit. Is he okay? She asked, the question she had been holding in her heart for the entire journey. The colonel's smile softened with a sad, gentle honesty. He's waiting for you, Emily. That's all the okay he needs right now. He stood up and gestured to the open door of the black sedan. Shall we? We don't want to keep a general waiting. Emily nodded. The colonel took her small bag, the one containing a change of clothes and a book, and placed it in the trunk. He held the car door open for her. As she slid onto the cool leather seat, she looked back up at the airplane. Brenda was still there, a lone figure silhouetted against the bright cabin light. Emily raised her hand and gave a small wave. Brenda, her hand pressed to her heart, waved back until the car door closed and the plane was lost to view. The woman in the business suit was already in the driver's seat. I'm Ms. Albright, from the State Department, she said, her voice crisp and efficient. We'll have you at Walter Reed in 20 minutes, Miss Vance. The traffic has been cleared for us. As the car pulled away from the plane, Colonel Hayes spoke into a small radio. Eagle is in the nest. I repeat, Eagle is in the nest. Proceeding to destination. The response was a crackle of static and a simple, "Roger that, Falcon. Godspeed." It all felt very serious and important. Emily looked out the window as the car sped along a private access road, bypassing the main airport traffic entirely. They merged onto a highway where two police motorcycles were waiting, their lights flashing silently. They fell in line, one in front and one behind, creating a bubble of clear road for the black sedan. Cars in other lanes seemed to part for them, as if by magic. "Your grandpa is a very important man," Colonel Hayes said, noticing her wide-eyed stare. He seemed to understand that she needed context, a way to process the surreal nature of her journey. "I know," Emily said. "He's a hero." "He is," the colonel agreed. "But do you know what makes a hero, Emily?" She thought for a moment. "Doing brave things? Like in a war?" "That's part of it," he said. "But the real part, the part that matters most, is what comes after. It's about how you treat people when the war is over. It's about being kind when you could be cruel. It's about being humble when you have every right to be proud. Your grandfather, he taught a whole generation of us how to be soldiers. But he taught us more about how to be good men." He paused, looking out the window as the Washington Monument slid past. "He told me a story once. About a time he was a young lieutenant, just a boy really. He made a mistake, a bad one, and a private under his command got hurt. He never forgave himself. He visited that private in the hospital every single day. Long after the boy was healed and sent home, your grandfather kept in touch, wrote letters, helped his family. He knew that his rank didn't make him better than that private. It just made him more responsible. That's the kind of man he is." Emily listened, absorbing every word. She had always known her grandfather was special, but hearing it from this soldier, this man who so clearly revered him, made it real in a new way. It helped her understand the big, important words she had heard on the plane. It wasn't about the medals or the titles. It was about the man who gave the best hugs. The car soon turned off the main highway and passed through a large, guarded gate. They were on the grounds of Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. It was more like a college campus than a hospital, with manicured lawns and stately brick buildings. The car didn't stop at the main entrance. It followed a winding road to a private wing at the very back, a quiet, secluded building overlooking a grove of trees. When the car stopped, the door was opened by a man in a dark suit with an earpiece. An honor guard of two Marines in full dress uniform stood at perfect attention on either side of the door. They didn't move a muscle as Emily and the colonel passed, but their presence filled the air with a solemn, powerful dignity. Inside, the atmosphere was hushed. The air smelled of antiseptic and floor wax, but there was a warmth to the place, too. The nurses who passed in the hallway smiled at Emily, their eyes full of a deep, knowing compassion. They all knew who she was. They all knew why she was here. They took an elevator to the top floor. The colonel led her down a quiet, carpeted hallway to a single door at the very end. A Navy captain, a woman with silver hair and a kind face, was waiting for them. She was a doctor. "Colonel Hayes," she said, her voice soft. "Emily, it's so good you're here. He's been asking for you." "How is he, doctor?" the colonel asked quietly. The doctor's expression was gentle but grave. "He's comfortable, but he's weak. He's been saving his strength for this." She knelt down to look Emily in the eye. "He looks a little different than you might remember, sweetie. He's thinner, and there are a lot of machines in the room to help him breathe and make him comfortable. They might look scary, but they aren't hurting him. They're helping him. Do you understand?" Emily nodded, clutching Major Ted a little tighter. She wasn't scared. Grandpa had told her about this, too. "My body is an old truck, Emmy," he had told her on the phone a few weeks ago. "The engine is worn out, and it's time to park it in the garage for good. But the driver is still me, and the driver can't wait to see you." "I'm ready," Emily said. The doctor smiled and opened the door. The room was filled with the soft, afternoon light streaming through a large window. And in the center of the room, in a bed propped up with pillows, was her grandpa. He was just as the doctor had described. Thinner, pale. A clear tube ran to his nose, and the soft, rhythmic puffing of a machine was the only sound in the room, apart from the quiet beeping of a heart monitor. But his eyes, the same clear, serious blue as her own, were open, and they were fixed on the door. When he saw her, a light came into those eyes that no machine could ever measure. It was a light of pure, unadulterated love, a slow, Weak smile spread across his face. "There she is," he whispered, his voice a dry, papery rustle. "There's my girl." Emily didn't run. She walked slowly, quietly, to the side of the bed. The colonel and the doctor stayed by the door, giving them their space. She looked at her grandpa, at the frail man in the bed who was also the strongest man she had ever known. She saw the lines of pain on his face, but she also saw the immense, unyielding strength in his gaze. "Hi, Grandpa," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Hi, Emmylou," he rasped, using his favorite pet name for her. He tried to lift his hand, but he didn't have the strength. You brought the Major. Good. Always need a co-pilot." Emily placed Major Ted on the bed beside his hand. Then, carefully, she leaned over and gave him a hug. It wasn't one of his big, warm blanket hugs. She had to be gentle, mindful of the tubes and wires. But as she laid her head on his chest, she could feel the faint, steady thump of his heart. It was the best hug in the entire world. "I missed you, Grandpa," she said into his hospital gown. "Missed you more," he breathed. "Tell me about your trip. Any trouble?" Emily sat up, a small, sad smile on her face. "A little," she said. "There was a mean pilot. He didn't think I belonged in my seat." General Vance's eyes, which had been soft with love, flashed with a spark of the old fire. "He was mistaken," he said, the words coming with effort. "You always belong. Emily, don't ever let anyone tell you you don't." He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his strength. The world is full of small people in big uniforms. Don't ever be one of them. He opened his eyes again, his gaze locking with hers. "You are a Vance. That's all. The authorization you will ever need." He had heard. Somehow, he knew everything that had happened. The Pentagon grapevine was faster than any news channel. And in his final hours, he was still teaching her, still giving her the strength she would need for the years to come. Meanwhile, a different kind of storm was breaking. The videos from Flight 714 had hit the internet like a detonation. Uploaded by a dozen different passengers, the clips showed everything. Brenda's condescending tone, Captain Evans's arrogant fury, Emily's quiet, tear-streaked defiance. The story was irresistible, a perfect storm of outrage and human interest. Maid's daughter kicked out of first class. Pilot says she doesn't belong, screamed one headline. Airline humiliates 11-year-old girl. Delays flight over ticket dispute, read another. By the time Emily's plane had landed at Washington Dulles, the story was the #1 trending topic on every social media platform. The airline, American Legacy Air, was engulfed in a public relations inferno. Their stock price was beginning to tremble. Their corporate headquarters in Dallas was in full-blown panic mode. Richard Sterling, the CEO of American Legacy Air, was in a board meeting discussing quarterly fuel cost hedging strategies when his assistant burst in, a tablet in her hand, her face ashen. She didn't say a word, just placed the tablet in front of him. Sterling, a man known for his icy composure, watched the video of Captain Evans looming over the small girl. He heard him say, "I am going to have you removed from my airplane." He felt a cold dread creep up his spine. He was a businessman. He understood liability. He understood brand damage. But as he watched the little girl's chin tremble and then firm up with resolve, he felt something else, too. A deep, personal shame. "Get me the flight number," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Get me the names of the crew. Get me the passenger manifest. And get me the head of the FAA on the phone. Now." The boardroom was cleared. For the next hour, Sterling and his crisis team worked the phones. The story they pieced together was far worse than a simple case of a crew member having a bad day. When the call came through from the Department of Defense, explaining exactly who Emily Vance was, the cold dread in Sterling's stomach turned to ice. He had once met General Michael Vance at a White House dinner. The man had a handshake like granite and an aura of quiet, unshakable integrity. Sterling, a man who commanded a corporate empire, had felt like a schoolboy in his presence. And his airline, his employee, had harassed that man's grieving granddaughter on her way to his deathbed. The consequences were swift and brutal. Captain David Evans was not in the cockpit of another plane. He was in a small, windowless office at the airline's operations center, being debriefed by two grim-faced men from corporate security and a lawyer from the FAA. By the time General O'Malley's official report was faxed over, his fate was sealed. He was fired before Emily had even reached the hospital. His pilot's license was suspended pending a federal investigation. His kingdom was gone. His career was over. He was escorted from the building, a king dethroned, stripped of his stripes and his pride. For Brenda Miller, the future was less certain. Her name was all over the initial reports, her face visible in the videos, her words repeated and condemned. The court of public opinion had already convicted her. But Richard Sterling had also read the reports from the new flight crew. He had been told about her apology. He had learned that she had chosen to stay with Emily, to see her mission through. He had heard, via a quiet back channel from the Pentagon, the child's own words. She was scared, but she did it anyway. Grandpa would say that was very brave. Sterling was a CEO, but he was also a father. He made a second decision. Brenda Miller would be suspended, pending a full review. She would be required to undergo intensive retraining in de-escalation and passenger sensitivity. But she would not be fired. Her mistake had been grievous, but her repentance, it seemed, had been genuine. What you do next is what counts. Back in the quiet hospital room, none of this mattered. The world outside, with its firestorm of news alerts and corporate panic, faded away. All that existed was the space between a grandfather and his granddaughter. They didn't talk much more. He was too tired, but they were together. Emily held his hand, her small, warm fingers wrapped around his thin, cool ones. She told him about school, about her mother's new haircut, about the funny thing the neighbor's dog had done. He just listened, his eyes closed, a faint smile on his lips. As the sun began to set, casting long, golden rays through the window, General Vance opened his eyes one last time. He looked at Emily, his gaze clear and full of a love that was as vast as the sky. "So proud of you, Emmy," he whispered. "So proud." And then, with his granddaughter's hand in his, the old soldier, the national hero, the man who gave the best hugs, quietly and peacefully, let go. The beeping of the heart monitor changed to a single, steady tone. It was a sound of finality, an end to a great and noble life. Emily felt the faint pressure of his hand relax. She knew he was gone. She didn't cry. Not yet. The tears would come later. For now, she just sat, holding the hand of the bravest man she had ever known. Colonel Hayes quietly entered the room and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. The journey was over. A new one was about to begin. But she was not afraid. She was a Vance. And a Vance is never, ever afraid to stand their ground when they are in the right. She had all the authorization she would ever need. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.